Hey, this is Chris from the Criminal Perspective Podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast you're currently listening to on the Crawlspace Media Network, consider checking out Criminal Perspective. On Criminal Perspective, I take 11 years of my experience corresponding with notorious murderers and I bring it directly to you. At times, I'll give you interviews directly with the most heinous murderers imaginable, like Nico Clos, the vampire of Paris. I read that you found some cookies in his kitchen and you just sat there eating cookies, watching him squirm around and die.
Yeah, it wasn't actual cookies. I think it was bread, just bread. But I ate something. I just sat down on a corner and watched him die, basically.
Other times, I'll bring you survivors of violent crime telling their harrowing tales themselves, like Shasta McLean, who survived being abducted by serial killer Joseph Duncan.
After being at that campsite for like a week or two, he had asked me how I wanted to die. He said because I had to choose one or the other. It could either be quick or it could be the slow process. So he gave me the option of being strangled to death, or he gave me the option of being shot.
So please check out Criminal Perspective on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere podcasts are heard. Criminal Perspective is a Crawlspace Media podcast.
You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas. As we head into part 2 of our conversation with Brianna Maitland's father, Bruce Maitland, we thought we might take a minute and talk a little bit more about the basics of the case and where we find ourselves. The case is a bit complicated. Let's just go through some of the basics to start with. Brianna Maitland was a 17-year-old girl living with her parents kind of out in the woods in Vermont. And as Bruce Maitland, her father, described in last week's episode, they were kind of back to the landers. They were sort of living off the grid, generating their own electricity, growing their own food, that kind of thing. Her father, Bruce Maitland, worked as a forestry consultant. So he's kind of a woodsy guy. And so the family is living out there a mile down the road from the main road. And this was not terribly appealing to 17-year-old Brianna. Her older brother had gone away to school, but he's 4 years older at age 21. He's a bit more out on his own. Brianna decides she wants to strike out on her own as well. So she makes arrangements with her parents, Bruce and Kelly, that she's going to move out of the house and transfer school so she can be with her friends. Brianna then ended up doing, though, was kind of couch surfing almost, living with friends as she was kind of sorting out where she was going to be living. She ended up staying with Jillian, who was a friend and roommate, and began working and decided to pursue her GED rather than continue to attend high school. Her intention was to graduate from high school and go on to college, and she was very ambitious. Her dad describes her as 17 going on 25, which made both Kristin and me laugh. The truth is, and we're not criticizing here at all, but Brianna Maitland is still a 17-year-old girl with, I think, the emotional maturity of a 17-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. And I think about my own son, Chris, who's now 22, and how much he's grown since he was a great 17-year-old kid, but he's a much more mature, thoughtful young person now, 5 years later, than he was as a high school graduate. So there's a lot of changes going on in a young person's life. Brianna was very ambitious. She was a hard worker. She was working as a waitress in a St. Albans, Vermont restaurant, and then also working evenings as a dishwasher at the Black Lantern Inn, which is in beautiful rural Montgomery, Vermont. And this is where she is last seen. Brianna goes missing in March 2004, and her car is found abandoned and backed into a boarded up building. It looks like a barn in some of the photographs, which we'll share with you in the show notes. It's actually an old boarded up house on a farm, very open fields, quite close to a state road, but it's a place where you can see a significant distance in all directions because it's open fields and woods and mountains are some distance away. The closest houses are more than 600 feet away, so about 2 football fields. The car is found abandoned under very odd circumstances. It looks like it's been backed up and actually crashed into the foundation of this old house. We don't want to make it sound like we're victim blaming in any way, shape, or form. Whatever happened to Brianna Maitland is not something that she deserved. But she's been missing now for 16 years, and I can't help but be struck by the fact that Brianna, out on her own, without parental supervision, has fallen in with a really, really rough crowd of people.
Yeah.
You can almost divide up the groups of potential suspects into a couple of different buckets of characters, but there is a significant amount of overlap. These are small towns in rural Vermont, and I'm always struck by the beauty of the place that they live. But there's also isolation and boredom and a lot of drug use, particularly back in 2004. And these are kids, really. 16, 17, 18 years old, high school age, and there's not much way around this. She, unfortunately, without the parental supervision that probably was helpful to her prior to this, she falls in with this heavy partying, drug-using crowd. There are working drug dealers in her immediate circle, and then a lot of drug users also in this immediate circle. And so some of these people who are classic suspects, potential murderers, are involved in other brutal murders within the next couple of years. There are a number of different people who sort of jump out as potentially being responsible for the disappearance of Brianna Maitland, including 2 drug dealers, Ramon Ryans, who had a nickname of Street, and another associate of Ramon Ryans is Nathaniel Charles Jackson, who goes by Lowe. Now, these guys are African-American drug dealers who've relocated from New York City to rural Vermont, which is a very white place. So they stand out on some level. And sadly, this group of white kids from Vermont somehow romanticize Ramon Ryans and Nathaniel Charles Jackson as somehow exotic and exciting because they are full-time drug dealers who are dealing heroin, cocaine, pot, you name it, but not working full-time. They're supporting themselves, working as drug dealers. These 2 people are involved in a number of really sketchy activities and may easily be involved in the disappearance of Brianna Maitland.
This is definitely one of those cases that the more you look at it, the more suspects that you learn about, the more rabbit holes you kind of jump down. And the more tangled and impenetrable it actually seems in determining what actually happened to Brianna Maitland. So it's going to be very interesting over the next couple of episodes as we talk to you to get an overview of the various possible people who might be involved with Brianna's disappearance, because there is so much to untangle in so many relationships.
Among the people that are also worth looking at, in our opinion, are Keely LaCrosse, who is a young woman who was responsible for beating up Brianna Maitland a few weeks prior to her disappearance. There are photographs of Brianna after she was assaulted by Keely LaCrosse, where Brianna ended up with 2 black eyes, cuts on her nose. It looks like her nose may actually be broken. This was a dispute over supposedly Brianna was flirting with her boyfriend, Mike Stebbins. Keely LaCrosse may have had reason to continue pursuing violence towards Brianna after Brianna filed assault charges after Keely LaCrosse beat her up. As I've said before, Brianna looks like she's gone 10 rounds with Mike Tyson after being punched out by Keely LaCrosse. Another former boyfriend on-again, off-again boyfriend of Brianna's, who was there when Keely LaCrosse assaulted her, is a guy named James Robitelli, he seems to go by. It's a French name, and Robitaille, I think, is the correct pronunciation. He seems to be potentially involved in Brianna's disappearance, as does Mike Stebbins, Keely LaCrosse's former boyfriend. And there are other female friends, Shauna LaBelle and KT Manning, and others that may be involved in Brianna's disappearance. And certainly some of these people who were about 17, 16 years ago and are now in their early 30s, some of these people, I think, know more about Brianna's disappearance, and for a variety of reasons, none of which are acceptable to me, and I think not to you either, Kristin.
Yeah.
They are not stepping forward and telling the Vermont State Police and the investigators who have been hired by private investigations for the missing, they're not telling them what actually happened to Brianna Maitland. I think that's a real shame, and I'm just baffled why people wouldn't be willing to step forward. You know, the Vermont State Police and the private investigators have made it very clear they have no interest in what drug use might have been taking place 16 years ago in 2004. They're interested in finding out what happened to Brianna Maitland, and I find it shameful that these people are not willing to step forward. Unfortunately now, in the 16 years since, several of these people have died. James Robitelli, whom I mentioned, was involved in a car accident and was killed in an accident which was his fault. And he struck another motorist going the other way at 5 o'clock in the morning in 2019. He killed the other motorist, and then he ended up burning to death in his vehicle. This is him, I believe, rushing off to work early in the morning, probably hungover, and passing on a hill and crashing into a motorist who's completely innocent coming the other way. Now, we can't ask James Robitelli, who was 33 at the time of his death and left 2 children without a father. We can't ask him if he's got anything further to say about what happened to someone that he supposedly cared about. There's some good news in the offing in the Brianna Maitland disappearance. The Vermont State Police have selected our friends at Othram Labs in Texas to do advanced forensic testing on some of the evidence that was left behind. And so hopefully in the coming months, Othram will be able to identify where this evidence came from and who may have been at the scene, where her car was found. I think it's beyond time for members of this community who know what happened to step forward and start coughing up names and particulars. Enough with the games playing and small town insane politics. These people are accessories to murder. If Brianna Maitland has been murdered, which I think is extremely likely, it's about time that people in the Montgomery, Vermont, and surrounding area stepped forward and started talking instead of gossiping and slinging accusations back and forth. Somebody has to know what happened to Brianna Maitland. As we continue our conversation with Bruce Maitland, we can get a better sense of what was going on with her at that time. And then jumping forward to 2020, let's hope that the science can start to allow us to have a better understanding of which suspects we should be looking at and who the private investigations for the missing team and the Vermont State Police investigators should be looking at.
And we are looking forward to bringing you continued coverage of the Brianna Maitland case. So we hope that you continue to stay tuned to Mind Over Murder. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas. Joining us again today is Bruce Maitland, Brianna Maitland's proud father and the founder of Private Investigations for the Missing, an organization we urge you to support. We've been having a fascinating conversation with Bruce about private investigations for the missing and how his experience as the father of a missing daughter has helped him help other families. So, Bruce, it sounds like you're a bit focused on the Northeast where you're from, because that's where the core group of investigators who volunteer their services has come from?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, we have 2 in Maryland, one in Massachusetts, one in New York State, and now we have one in California.
And I know you.
So there's a whole lot of the country to fill up yet with investigators.
So if other private investigators want to get involved, they can also contact you via the website?
Yes, they can.
And the website again is?
investigationsforthemissing.org.
So we wanted to shift gears a little bit to Brianna's case again. You've had some new developments in her case. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Vermont State Police's decision to bring in Othram Labs out of Texas?
Well, I got a phone call just, I guess, a couple of weeks ago now from my contact, who's head of the criminal division of the Vermont State Police. And he just very briefly just kind of talked about Othram Labs and that there was DNA testing that was a lot more extensive than what they had done or could do. They asked me if I was interested, if, you know, they would send a few samples down. And I was like, of course. And so he explained to me that, you know, the lab does this and then promotes it and receives donations, and that it wasn't going to cost me personally, you know, to pay for this particular test. And I was like, sure, let's give it a go. And I'm kind of excited about this, really, because after hearing from David Middleman, you know, the founder and owner of the lab, it was just amazing the amount of DNA advancement that's happened. And I do kind of monitor cases, just different cases that I happen to pick up. You know, you see where cases get closed this way, a lot of cold cases. And in fact, it seems like in cold cases, it's involved in the primary way that things kind of get on the right track. So I'm really excited to get the results from this and see what happens.
So where is the DNA from? Is it from like the front seat of the car, or have they told you where that DNA came from?
I'm really not at liberty to say that.
Okay.
They want to hold that really close.
Yeah, fair enough.
We had talked about Crawlspace, Lance and Tim, the co-hosts of Crawlspace, and using their media spotlight with their two podcasts, Crawlspace and Missing Maura Murray, to help offer some focus here. I had a really interesting experience last night. I watched and listened to you speaking to David Middleman from the DNA lab, Othram Labs, down outside of Houston, Texas. Was that the first opportunity you had to speak to David directly?
Yes, it was. Yeah, I'm very impressed. He has a lot of passion and zeal for what he's doing.
He really does. That's one of our favorite things about him, I would say, is that he is so very passionate and dedicated. Yeah,
and his model for doing this, you know, soliciting donations and kind of trying to get his foot in the door, boy, it just says his heart's all in the right place.
Yeah, we thought so too. And full disclosure, Othram are a sponsor of Mind Over Murder, this program, and our listeners will hear an ad for Othram Labs and their free website, DNAsolves.com, which accepts donations for people to assist in investigations like the one that's now proceeding with Brianna's case, as well as they're asking people to donate their DNA profiles, which you'd get from Ancestry.com or 23andMe or any of the commercial websites where many of us have searched for family members and that kind of thing, done our own genealogy. They will accept your profile into a database that's used for law enforcement exclusively. So they use the GEDmatch database, of course, and other databases, and now they've decided to make a free database available to people to allow them to have another place to help law enforcement solve cases. Have they given you any indication of the timing of the way the test sequence would go, Bruce?
I don't expect it to be any less than a few months. Of course, I would like to know tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think we can understand that. You're not dealing with Othram directly in most typical situations. In other words, they'll deal with the Vermont State Police investigators?
Yes.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. One of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helps solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com. In these stressful times, everyone needs some time to chill out and relax. That's why we're excited to announce this week's sponsor, Boston Green Health.
Boston Green Health is a local provider of CBD products that specializes in oils, topicals, gummies, and edibles. Boston Green Health's plant-based products can provide natural relief and rest for the mind, body, and soul.
As one of New England's premier hemp-based companies, they offer a variety of all-natural CBD products that use a blend of locally sourced hemp extract.
Visit bostongreenhealth.com for premium CBD oil, a delicious variety of CBD-infused gummies, luxurious handcrafted topicals, and a product line for pets.
Mind Over Murder listeners can receive 20% off any purchase by using show code MOM20.
Boston Green Health takes pride in being New England's most trusted CBD brand.
Visit bostongreenhealth.com and use show code MOM20 for 20% off any purchase. Do you like our show, Mind Over Murder, and want to create your own podcast?
Well then, let us tell you about Anchor.
First of all, it's free. And who doesn't love free, right?
I like free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer.
You can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before.
Anchor will then distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more platforms.
And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership.
I like the sound of that. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Right here, Anchor.
Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started on your own podcast.
You can tell them Kristin and Bill from Mind Over Murder sent you. We're back here at Mind Over Murder. I know things ebb and flow in cases. How often would you normally interact with the investigators from the Vermont State Police?
At this point, I mean, we keep in quasi-regular touch. I usually talk to him every couple of months. It really depends on what lead is going on. And quite frankly, most of the leads in Brianna's case, I would say within the last 10 years, have come from my investigator.
Very interesting.
So,
Okay.
And we have sort of a good deal going. I told them, really, I mean, if they have a lead going and they whatever they wish to share from me from a lead that comes to them directly, then, I'm okay with letting that ride out and letting them work it, because they get a lot of crazy stuff, quite frankly. And then there's different times where, a body's been found in Vermont or skeletal remains found. I kind of just let them go with that. Mm-hmm. And when they're ready to, I don't call them and bug them about it. I just let it go. And eventually it'll come out in the news who it is or whatever. And it saves me a lot. A classic example is one time they had a prisoner who contacted them and said, I was in on it. I know where I watched it happen, and I know exactly where Brianna is. Mm-hmm. So they haul him out of jail and they take him there, and it becomes obvious once he gets there. The guy wants a day out of jail.
I was thinking this sounds like a field trip.
And that's the kind of shit I don't need to know about.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't. But on the other side of the coin, when I've given them a lead through my investigators, then I expect to be informed on that every step of the way. And they've been pretty good about that.
How have they been on that? Are they good about getting back to you?
Yes, they are. They will tell me, okay, look, this is what we've done. This is what we're in the process of doing. I mean, some of that kind of fell apart during this whole COVID thing, quite frankly.
Right.
And that's been disappointing. But we gave them a pretty decent lead about 6 months ago. And, they've been working on that lead with all the restrictions and stuff. So they're responsive when they get it.
So I know that the FBI was involved at one point in this, and we haven't really touched a whole lot on their involvement. How would you characterize your interactions with the FBI with regard to this case?
I'll go out on a limb here. There's nothing I can say good about the FBI. In any of my interactions with them, I've just been really disappointed. And even the lab work and stuff, it's terrible, the amount of turnaround time. And it's just, I don't know. It's hard to go any further into individual instances, but I just have a really poor opinion of the FBI. I'm sure there's some good agents that really try to do a good job, but something's wrong there, really wrong.
Well, I'll weigh in on the dissatisfaction with the turnaround time at the lab. I'll say this for anyone who wants to listen. The FBI lab in Quantico clearly does not have enough resources to do the job they're being asked to do. We are told routinely in the Colonial Parkway murders will have results in 6 months. I'm not kidding. For every single test. This is insane. I get the fact that when we're talking about Brianna's case, we're talking about a cold case that's now 16 years old. In my sister Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski's case in the Colonial Parkway murders, we're talking about a case that's 34 years old. I get the fact that there is going to be somewhat less urgency in a cold case, but to wait 6 months for every test is completely unacceptable. So I think my experience with the FBI might have been more positive than yours, Bruce, but the turnaround time at the lab is insane.
Well, and that's part of their mission. That's their job, to find missing people. And I just think, rather than, they should either make a reorganization in that whole department, or they should start a new organization there, one made up of people that really do care about finding missing people, and take that job description and mission that they're supposed to be on seriously. It's just, it's awful. There's,
Well, something I have said in other interviews, which bears repeating, and this might not be a popular opinion, but the decision to redeploy the FBI as an anti-terrorism agency after 9/11, I understand it. I'm not pushing back against that decision, but people have to understand that had consequences. In my opinion, the FBI isn't really doing the job on murders and missing people across the country because they're devoting 90 cents on the dollar to the anti-terrorism effort when we actually had 17 different organizations that could have handled the anti-terrorism effort. And I think the listeners need to understand this, that our decision to redeploy the FBI as an anti-terrorism agency has had direct consequences, which is why our close rate in murders is plunging across the country. And smaller states like Vermont are dependent upon agencies like the FBI to conduct forensic tests and provide assistance. And it is increasingly difficult for smaller states like Vermont and smaller communities, which all of us are scattered across the country. If you're not living in a major city, your local law enforcement is probably dependent on the FBI for some of their forensic testing.
Yeah. And I don't know, it just galls me because they seem to always have the manpower to do something that's going to flash out on the news and public to show what a great job they're doing. And but the real nuts and bolts of it is just not there.
How do you feel about the GoFundMe aspect of what Othram's doing to raise the $5,000 to help cover the costs of the lab tests?
I think that's a terrific way to work it initially. I hope they can survive on that. To me, it seems like a really tough economical way to go about it. But, I wish them the best. I hope that as things move forward to them, that police departments all over the country start to use them and they get maybe to build up the volume that, that they can afford to deliver those services and right to the police department and develop their contracts or whatever else they've got on their mind with that kind of stuff. Because it's definitely a need out there with tons and tons and tons of, I mean, how many cold cases are sitting around in places in the country with evidence that's just there?
I'm told
nothing's getting done. I imagine it would be scary to really know.
The estimate I've seen, Bruce, is that there are 250,000 cold case homicides in the United States currently unsolved.
Mm-hmm.
As a reminder for our listeners, if you want to assist in helping to fund the DNA investigation into Brianna's case, go to DNAsolves.com, and then there's a very nice write-up with a photograph of Brianna and a description of what's happening in terms of her case from a science perspective. There's an opportunity for you to click right there and make a contribution. I was so inspired by listening in on your conversation last night that I made a contribution myself. It was very interesting seeing the dynamic between you as an advocate and the father of a missing girl and David Middleman from Othram, who told me this morning he was a little nervous talking with you because obviously he doesn't want to overpromise what the science will produce. But I think everyone that watched the conversation, one of the strongest takeaways, I was in the chat group, we were watching and listening in. Everyone was incredibly impressed with the interaction between the two of you and David Middleman's incredible passion and commitment to helping families of missing and murdered. It was really kind of a privilege to listen to that conversation with the two of you and Lance and Tim from Crawlspace.
Yeah, that was amazing. I made a donation myself. My mind was kind of turning while that was going on, too. I mean, I would love to be able to get to the point where us as an organization, Private Investigation for the Missing, might be able to help some families when the police really don't want to take that step even, you know?
Absolutely. Of course, it all comes down to who controls the evidence as well. In other words, as you said,
you have to have the cooperation of the law enforcement agencies. But sometimes, they're just not motivated for it. They need that little bit of push.
Vermont could have pulled out a check for $5,000 and sent it to Othram and gotten the process started. But I think what Othram is trying to do is show states like Vermont that this can be done. And the truth is, if you think about the tens of thousands of hours that have gone into the investigation into Brianna's disappearance, $5,000 isn't really that much money compared to how many that go into an investigation like this. I can't even imagine if you put a number to that. It has to be in the in the tens of thousands of hours range.
Yes.
And not to mention all of the time that you've put in, which of course has just been your own free time.
Yeah, and that's why I'm hopeful that this, economies of scale will somehow work for them and it'll kick in. That, A, they'll be able to do it more reasonable, and B, because maybe they can grow with this too, and it just can just be a great thing.
So clearly, we know that you would like to see justice done and answers come for Brianna's case, but what else would you like to see happen in the future with regard to private investigations for the missing? What are your goals?
Well, my goals are pretty big, honestly. I mean, I would like to help everybody. That one of the key things, and when I was talking earlier about the details, is that, I have found that for this to work as the organization, the investigator has to be located very close to the missing person disappearance.
Right.
It just makes for, the economy of actually, doing something, on a part-time basis, more realistic. And it's also, I've learned too, through some of my own experience, it's very cultural too. You can't go into an area, let's just take, for example, if you go into a real rural area where everybody knows everybody, mm-hmm. and you're from that area and kind of what's going on,
right? And
you know how to talk the talk, you're the person that's going to get the information, not some guy from New York City. And the same thing in regards to the same. I mean, I wouldn't want to send a guy that's used to work in the small town rural area into New York City and try to figure out how to get information.
Right.
So the goal is to be able to find people in every locale with a radius of being able to do an investigation as we get them. And then for us to be actively go out and seek people that we can help, people that have just lost all hope and literally don't know what to do. and be able to help those people. So that's really, that's a huge goal, I realize, and it has to happen, a little bit at a time as we get the funding, and that's our biggest hurdle right now. Mm-hmm. We have to get the funding to be able to make things happen.
So you'll take donations from $10 to $10 million. Is that your range?
Yes. Actually, over 10 million. I would take an over too. I wouldn't want to cut it off.
Yeah, wouldn't want to cut that off. So if someone's had a tremendous amount of success and wants to help thousands of people in need, they could contact you at Private Investigations for the Missing, and you'd be willing to have a conversation about that.
Absolutely. And I think that, a small organization, it's beneficial because you're seeing that your money really is going toward it. It's not going, you're not going to open the newspaper. Well, nobody opens the newspaper anymore, but you're going to open a story and find out that your organization, that your work has just contributed 3 years of your donation time to something, and they're just throwing it away on some massive party, and everybody's making $100,000, and you're not going to find that out with Private Investigations for the Missing. No matter how big we get, the core mission of the organization is going to stay the same.
It doesn't sound like you've ever lost focus in terms of what you're trying to do.
And not as long as I'm alive, that's what the focus is going to be.
Wow.
Well, this is very, very inspirational, and it's been just terrific talking to you about what's going on with the organization and some hopeful signs in Brianna's case. So people can go to DNAsolves.com if they want to make a contribution to help with the DNA testing in Brianna's case. My understanding is that we hope to have results. And again, there are no guarantees. David Middleman made this quite clear in talking to you last night, Bruce. He can't guarantee that there's going to be an outcome here. It did sound like Middleman and his team were determined to do the absolute best job they could with whatever evidence is presented to them to give you the answers that the science will allow.
I fully agree. From listening to him, I feel like, if he can't get anything out of that, then it can't be done.
At this point, I think you're right. They're breaking some major cases. They just broke the Carla Walker case down in Fort Worth, which was a 46-year-old cold case that a number of other DNA labs had tested and been unsuccessful. The Othram folks are doing something called full genome sequencing, where instead of taking what they call an array or SNPs or kind of a sampling of our DNA markers, which is what is done in the CODIS system, no criticism, but that's how the system is set up. What David and his team are doing is doing full genome sequencing, mapping the entire available genome, which increases their opportunity for identifying what the source of DNA might be. They keep it in-house in terms of their forensic genealogy and using the available websites, DNAsolves.com, GEDmatch.com, and other sites that allow for law enforcement testing. So it really increases the chance that they may be able to identify a family group or a perpetrator and then go back to law enforcement and say, we believe you should be looking for someone from this family or this group of people, or sometimes we believe you should be looking at a particular individual. As you were saying earlier, Bruce, the science has advanced so much in the years since Brianna went missing, and especially, I would say, in the last 5 years, the amount of DNA evidence that's required has gotten much, much smaller, and the opportunity for identification has gotten so much larger. Some of these 250,000 cold cases around the country may be solved. We're going to see some other major announcements of other cases that have broken. I can't get into details yet, but some other major cases are going to be announced in the next few weeks that have been solved, and the law enforcement agencies responsible have to work out the logistics of making arrests and, of course, making announcements, which is always exciting when we get to that place.
Mm-hmm. And it surprised me on a number of cases, as I read some of them, look at them, it just surprises me that a lot of times the person that pops up in some of these solved cases is somebody that was not even under the radar.
Yeah, it's amazing that way.
So it just goes to say that, I mean, those cases just would not have ever gotten solved without that DNA test. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we wish the very, very best of luck with the testing that Othram is going to do for Brianna, and we are very much looking forward to talking to you again once you do have some answers. We hope you'll come back and talk to us again once you have some answers.
Sure. Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Bruce. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Join us next time for more information on the Brianna Maitland case when we'll be talking to Louis Berry and Greg Overacker from Private Investigations for the Missing. Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder. Join us again soon.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.